The sound was deafening, glass shattering, wood cracking, the delicate ribs of my greenhouse snapping like bones under boots. I stood frozen in the driveway, keys in my hand, as I watched my brother swing the crowbar one more time. My orchids trembled under the collapsing beams, their blooms folding into themselves as if they, too, felt the violence. He didn't stop when I screamed his name. He only glanced at me once, eyes wild, jaw clenched, and then brought the crowbar down on the irrigation pump I had saved 3 years to afford. My name is Emily Carter. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Like the moment you draw a boundary, you become the villain in their story. That greenhouse wasn't just glass and steel. It was $22,000 of sweat, dirt under my fingernails, and nights I went without heat in my own house just to afford another pane of reinforced glass. It was mine. My dream, and my brother destroyed it because I told him no. I remember how his breath came ragged as he dropped the crowbar, the clang echoing like a gunshot. The silence after was worse. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look guilty. He just wiped the sweat off his forehead and muttered, "You think you're better than me, Emily. Always have." The police lights painted the wreckage in red and blue later that night, turning the shards into something almost beautiful. But beauty was the last thing I felt. As I gave my statement, I kept glancing at the ruins. The misting system I'd installed with trembling hands last spring lay in pieces. The rare seedlings I had imported from Costa Rica were crushed beneath beams. The air smelled like soil and betrayal, and yet, when my parents arrived, my mother clutching her pearls, my father stiff with silent anger, it wasn't him they looked at. It was me, Emily, my mother whispered, tugging my sleeve as if I were a child again. "Don't do this. He's your brother." But I had already signed the statement. I could feel the story shifting inside me, like a storm cloud pulling tight. My family thought this was between siblings, a spat that could be mended with apologies and promises. But they hadn't stood in that driveway. They hadn't heard the sound of dreams collapsing under steel. When the officer asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, and as my brother was led away in cuffs, he turned his head toward me, lips curling into something between a sneer and a smile. "Blood's blood, Emily," he said. "We'll see who they choose." The words lodged themselves in me like glass under skin, because deep down, I already knew the answer. The destruction of my greenhouse was just the opening act. The real betrayal was yet to come. The phone rang. Before dawn the next morning. I knew who it was before I picked up. "Emily," my mother's voice cracked through the receiver, brittle and rehearsed. "We need to talk about last night." I stared out the window at what was left of my greenhouse. The skeletal remains were black silhouettes against the gray sky, like a war zone that had crept onto my property overnight. My coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I didn't move to warm it. "What's there to talk about?" I said flatly. "Your brother made a mistake," she replied, stressing the word mistake as if reducing $22,000 of destruction into a single syllable would make it smaller, more forgivable. "You know how he's been struggling." Struggling. That was their favorite word for him. My brother, Jason Carter, 34, unemployed, and always one step away from another excuse. "I'm not dropping the charges," I said, my tone sharp enough to cut silence. Then my father's voice, steady but heavy, filled the line. "Emily, he's family. We handle things in this family without dragging outsiders into it. You've already made your point. Don't ruin his life." I closed my eyes, my grip tightening on the mug until it threatened to crack. Ruin his life. Though I hadn't just watched him ruin mine, I didn't ruin his life, I said quietly. He did that himself. The line went dead a second. Later. By noon, they were on my porch. My mother carried a Tupperware container of lemon bars, as if sugar could coat the bitterness between us. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, face set in that permanent mask of authority I had grown up resenting. "I didn't invite them in, Emily," my mother started, already on the verge of tears. "The lawyer says if you retract your statement, the charges won't stick. He doesn't have a record. He can still come back from this." "Back from what?" I snapped. "From destroying my greenhouse? From stealing 3 years of work out from under me? From making sure I'll spend the next year paying off repairs instead of expanding like I planned? Which part exactly should I be excited to help him come back from?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, my father reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out between 2 fingers like an offering. "What's this?" I asked, though dread already hollowed my stomach. $5,000, he said. "Cash. To help with the damage. Just let this go. For the family." I laughed. The sound startled me. It was sharp, humorless, the laugh of someone who had just realized the people she loved most would rather buy her silence than defend her truth. $5,000. I said. "My greenhouse cost me 22. Do you think I'm stupid? Or is this the price of loyalty in this family now?" My father's jaw tightened. You're being cruel, Emily. Cruel, the word clung to me like smoke. Was I cruel for standing up for myself? For not rolling over and pretending the wreckage outside was just an accident, a blip in the Carter family storybook? My mother reached out, her hands trembling. Please, sweetheart. Don't send your brother to prison. I stepped back. The porch light above us buzzed faintly, a moth circling in desperate loops. Go home, I said. The following week was a blur of insurance calls, police updates, and endless stares from neighbors who slowed their cars as they passed my property. Pity in their eyes. Curiosity too. Everyone in town had heard. Everyone knew. At night, I lay awake replaying the moment Jason looked at me in handcuffs, the sneer etched on his face. We'll see who they choose, and I knew he wasn't wrong, because the calls didn't stop. My mother rang daily, her pleas dripping with guilt. My father's tone grew colder each time I refused. And then came the letters, handwritten, left in my mailbox without postage. Family doesn't turn on family. You're breaking us apart. Blood is thicker than water. I burned the first two. Kept the third. The pretrial hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Jason was out on bail by then, thanks to my parents. He didn't come near me, but I could feel his presence like a shadow on my skin, lingering. Watching point one evening, I found footprints in the mud by the wreckage of the greenhouse. Too large to be mine. Too fresh to be old. That night, I double-locked every door and slept with the lights on. I wanted to believe justice would be simple, crime committed, charges pressed, accountability followed. But nothing about this was simple, because every time I spoke to the detective, I heard my father's voice in my head, don't ruin his life. Because every time I looked at the ruins, I heard my brother's, we'll see who they choose, and every time I saw my own reflection in the window glass, fractured and ghostly, I wondered if I was becoming the villain in their story after all. The day before the hearing, another envelope appeared in my mailbox, but this one wasn't from my parents. Inside was a single photo, me, taken through my living room window. I was sitting at my desk, head bowed, pen in hand. Vulnerable. Unaware. On the back, in my brother's handwriting, were 3 words, drop the charges. I sat there on the kitchen floor, photo trembling in my hands, the taste of metal rising in my mouth. The greenhouse was gone. My family was gone, and now, my safety was too. The war I hadn't asked for had officially begun. The photo stayed on my counter all night. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, couldn't even shove it in a drawer. It sat there like a silent witness, proof that Jason wasn't just angry, he was escalating. By morning, I'd barely slept. My hands shook as I dialed the detective. Assigned to my case, Detective Harris. Miss Carter, he said, calm but clipped. Do you still have the photo? Yes. Don't destroy it. Bag it if you can. We'll add it to the file. I swallowed hard. But what if he comes back? What if? Don't engage him, Harris cut me off. If he contacts you again, document it. For now, stay. Somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. I looked out at the ruins of my greenhouse, glass teeth jutting from the soil like a graveyard, and wondered where safety could possibly exist when your own blood wanted to see you break. That afternoon, my parents showed up again. This time, they didn't knock. They walked right in, the spare key I'd once given them glinting on my father's keyring as he swung the door open. My heart lurched. If Jason could photograph me through my window, what was stopping him from walking in, too? Emily, enough is enough, my father said, striding into my kitchen as if he still owned the place. We know about the picture. My mother hovered behind him, pale and frantic. You told Jason's lawyer about it, didn't you? I asked, fury sparking in my chest. My father didn't answer. Instead, he placed another envelope on my counter, beside the photo. This is $10,000, he said. It's all we can do. Retract your statement before the hearing. Please. Think about what prison will do to your brother. I stared at the envelope. Then at my father. Do you even hear yourself? My voice cracked, rage spilling over. Jason destroyed my greenhouse. He's threatening me in my own home. And your solution is to pay me off and protect him? What about me? What about my life? My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. Sweetheart, you're strong. You'll rebuild. But your brother, he won't survive prison. I laughed bitterly. Maybe he should have thought of that before he picked up a crowbar. The silence that followed was suffocating. When they finally left, they took the envelope with them. Their footsteps down the porch sounded like a retreat, like soldiers abandoning the wounded on a battlefield. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I pulled every curtain closed, checked each lock twice, then curled up on the couch with a blanket and the baseball bat I'd pulled from the closet. The house creaked and shifted in the wind, every sound sharpening my nerves. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke, it was to the sound of my phone buzzing. On the table. A text from an unknown number, pretty when you sleep. My blood turned to ice. I didn't think, I called Harris immediately. He told me to come down to the station first thing in the morning, bring the phone, bring everything, but morning felt impossibly far away. I stayed awake until the sun finally broke, painting the world in gold that felt hollow. False.at the station. Harris studied the texts with a furrowed brow. We can't prove it's him, not yet. But combined with the photo, it builds a case. Don't delete anything. We'll request records from the carrier. What if he doesn't stop? I asked, my voice breaking. Harris leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. Then we'll make sure the judge sees just how dangerous he is. You're doing the right thing, Emily. Don't let them convince you otherwise. For the first time in weeks, someone said what I desperately needed to hear, but the trial was still weeks away. And Jason wasn't waiting quietly. 2 days later, I found my garden torn apart, pots smashed, soil scattered, seedlings ripped from their roots and tossed like garbage. The message was clear, nothing of mine was safe. When I told my parents, my mother sobbed, but my father only sighed. He's lashing out because he's scared, he said. Emily, can't you see you're pushing him too far? I'm pushing him? I shouted, disbelief clawing up my throat. He's terrorizing me, Dad. He's escalating. And you're still standing in his corner. You're my daughter, he said firmly. But Jason's my son. And sons need saving. That's when it hit me, they didn't just want me to drop the charges. They were prepared to sacrifice me if that's what it took to protect him. That night, I packed a bag. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, one of those anonymous places with buzzing neon and curtains that smelled like cigarettes. I thought, maybe distance would calm me, give me space to breathe, but when I pulled the curtain shut and turned on the lamp, something stopped me cold. On the bedside table, beneath the Bible every motel leaves behind, was a folded piece of paper. I opened it with trembling hands. In Jason's handwriting, scrawled like a dare, were the words, you can run. You can hide. But blood always finds you. My stomach dropped. He had been here. He knew the motel room. Walls pressed in on me, suffocating, until I realized the truth. This wasn't just about a greenhouse anymore. This wasn't even about money. Jason wanted me afraid, broken, silent, and my parents, my own blood, were helping him do it. The choice was clear. I couldn't hide. I couldn't back down. If they wanted war, I would give them one. The paper from the motel still burned in my pocket as I drove back home. I hadn't planned to return so soon, but something inside me shifted the moment I saw those words. Blood always finds you. He wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was promising to hunt me down, and if Jason wanted me cornered, he was about to learn. I didn't do well in cages. The first thing I did was install cameras, 4 around the house, 2 facing the greenhouse wreckage, 1 inside my kitchen. Every dime I had left from my emergency savings went into equipment, alarms, motion lights. When the technician asked if I had trouble with vandals, I forced a smile. Something like that. But I was past the point of pretending. That night, when the lights glared across the yard at every rustle, I finally breathed easier. For the first time in weeks, I didn't sleep with a bat by my bed. I slept with my phone in my hand instead. 2 days later, the footage proved me right. At 2:13 a.m., the motion lights flared on. Jason appeared in the glow, his hood pulled low. His movements slow and deliberate. He didn't try to break in. He didn't shout. He didn't even approach the cameras. He just stood at the edge of my ruined greenhouse and stared up at my window for almost 20 minutes, motionless. Silent, like a predator waiting for its prey to notice. When I showed Detective Harris the footage, his jaw tightened. This changes things, he said. We'll push for a restraining order immediately. And if he violates it, he'll have nowhere to hide. For a flicker of a moment, I felt hope, but then my parents called again. Emily, my mother whispered through the line, her voice raw from crying, why are you doing this to him? To us? Do you hate us that much? Hate, that word hit harder than cruel. I'm not doing this to you, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Jason is. He's terrorizing me. He left a note at my motel, Mom. He's stalking me. Stop exaggerating, my father's voice cut in. You always were dramatic. He's angry, yes, but he's your brother. A restraining order? Do you understand what that will do to his record? Yes, I snapped. That's the point. A heavy silence. Then, coldly, my father said, if you go through with this, Emily, don't expect us to stand by you. You'll be choosing strangers over family. Then so be it. I hung up. My hand shook afterward, but not from fear this time. From clarity. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just Jason against me. It was all of them. The restraining order went through faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, Jason was legally bound to stay 500 feet away from me and my property, but paper doesn't stop rage. The very next night, I heard the sound, not glass this time, but metal. A screeching scrape outside my window. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering, and peeked through the blinds. Jason was there, dragging a rake along the siding of my house, carving deep scratches into the paint. I hit record on my phone's camera. My hands shook, but I made sure I got everything: his face under the hood, the rake in his hands, the malicious grin when he noticed the motion light kick on. When I shouted that the police were on their way, he didn't run. He blew me a kiss and walked off. By the time the cops arrived, he was gone. But I had the video. When Harris saw it, his tone shifted. "This is violation, clear as day. We'll file for arrest." But I could already feel the backlash coming, because if Jason was this bold, it meant he thought someone had his back. And I knew exactly who that was. The next morning, I woke to banging on my door. Not Jason, my parents. They stormed in before I could stop them, their faces red, their words a storm. "How dare you call the police again?" my father barked. "Do you want to destroy him?" "He's destroying me," I screamed back, my voice breaking. "Look around you. Look at what's left of my life. Do you even care that I'm terrified in my own home?" My mother clutched her chest as though she were the victim. "Emily, families don't do this. Families forgive. Families don't terrorize their own," I shot back, but they weren't listening. They had made their choice. Finally, my father's words cut the air like a blade. "If you go forward with this arrest, Emily, you're no daughter of mine." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. My parents, who had raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and taught me to tie my shoes, were ready to erase me from their lives to protect my brother, and for the first time, I realized something terrifyingly liberating. If they could disown me so easily, then maybe I didn't owe them my silence anymore. That night, I uploaded the footage, not to the police, not to a lawyer. To the cloud, to drives, to places they couldn't erase it. And as I sat there staring at the glow of my computer screen, my decision crystallized. If Jason wanted war, I was done playing defense. I was going to burn every lie my family told the world about who we were. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be Jason standing in the wreckage. It would be all of us. The first lie I exposed was small. A fracture in the mask my family had worn for decades. My father always told anyone who would listen that Jason had potential, that he'd just been unlucky. What he never mentioned was the trail of debts my brother left behind, unpaid loans, stolen tools, neighbors too polite to press charges. I still had receipts, copies of texts, emails, the frantic messages Jason sent me years ago when he needed money to tide him over. The ones I foolishly paid. That night, I sat at my desk, uploading them into a folder titled "The Truth About Jason Carter," and I didn't just keep it for myself. I sent copies to the detective, to the prosecutor, even to the local paper. For once, Jason's sins wouldn't vanish behind whispered family excuses. The fallout came fast. Within days, whispers about Jason's troubled past spread through town. My parents called me, furious, their voices breaking through the phone like cracked glass. "You're destroying your brother." My mother sobbed. "No," I said, my voice steady now. "I'm exposing him." My father's voice was sharp enough to draw blood. "You've always been jealous. You couldn't stand that he had charm, that people liked him. You want to see him fall because you could never measure up." I laughed, bitter and raw. "Measure up to what? To a man who breaks into his sister's life and tears it apart? If that's your standard, then thank God I'll never meet it." I hung up before he could spit more venom. Something inside me shifted that night. I realized I wasn't just fighting Jason anymore. I was dismantling the entire illusion my parents had built around him, and once you start tearing down a house of cards, you don't stop. The second lie I exposed was bigger. Growing up, my father preached about integrity, about how a Carter's word was as solid as oak. But I remembered the day I found out about the foreclosure scare, the one he covered by borrowing from my college fund without telling me. I dug up the old documents. Bank notices, letters, the balance sheet that had once kept me from transferring to the university I wanted. I posted them anonymously, attached to my father's name. By morning, the whispers weren't just about Jason. They were about him, too. My phone buzzed endlessly, blocked numbers, messages dripping with rage. I let them ring. I was done answering. Jason, of course, didn't stay quiet. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of pounding on my front door. When I checked the camera feed, there he was. No hood this time. No attempt at hiding. He was drunk, swaying, shouting loud enough to wake the neighbors. "Open up, Em. Let's settle this like family." I called 911 with shaking hands, voice barely steady. By the time the cruisers pulled up, Jason was hurling rocks at my porch light, laughing like it was all a game. They arrested him on the spot, but as the officers dragged him away, he twisted his head toward the camera, and he smiled, like he knew the war wasn't ending here. The next morning, my parents arrived again. This time, they didn't bring money. They brought venom. "You've turned him into a criminal in the eyes of this town," my father snarled, pacing my living room like a caged animal. "Do you know what people are saying about us? About our family?" I met his eyes, calm but unyielding. "Maybe they're finally saying the truth." My mother sank into a chair, sobbing. "You're cruel, Emily. He's your brother. You're supposed to love him. I almost pitied her in that moment, clutching at the ashes of the fantasy she'd built around her golden boy. But pity was dangerous. Pity was how I'd stayed silent for years. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. Love doesn't mean silence. Love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you piece by piece because they share your blood. If that's what family means to you, then I want no part of it. My father's hand slammed against the wall, the sound making my mother flinch. You'll regret this, he spat. Blood always wins. I stared at him, at the man who had raised me, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Not this time, I said. That night, I made my final move. I gathered every piece of evidence, the photos, the texts, the videos, the bank records, and put them into a drive. But I didn't just store it. I sent it to people who couldn't be silenced: the prosecutor, the town council, reporters who loved nothing more than a scandal rooted in hypocrisy, and then I sent one final copy to my parents' inbox, subject line clear and deliberate: if you keep protecting him, this is what the world will see. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by the window, watching the motion light sweep across the wreckage of my greenhouse, listening to the quiet hum of the night. For weeks, Jason had wanted me broken. My parents had wanted me silenced, but in that moment, I realized something that sent a chill of power through me. They had underestimated me. They thought I was fragile glass, but glass, when shattered, leaves shards sharp enough to cut, and I was ready to cut deep. The courthouse smelled like dust and nerves. Jason shuffled in, wearing a wrinkled button-down, his wrists free but his arrogance shackled to him like always. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but Jason's eyes found mine instantly. That smirk was still there, the same one he wore when the greenhouse collapsed, but this time, I wasn't shaking. I had my folder in my lap, thick with evidence. The photos. The texts. The videos. The note at the motel. The footage of him raking scars into the siding of my house. The prosecutor glanced at me before standing. Your Honor, we have clear violations of the restraining order. We request revocation of bail and immediate custody. Jason's lawyer stood too, puffed up with false confidence. My client is a victim of exaggeration. This is a family dispute blown out of proportion. But then the screen lit up with the video, the one where Jason, lit by my motion light, dragged the rake against my house and blew me that kiss. The courtroom murmured. My parents shifted uncomfortably in the back row, and Jason, he laughed, actually laughed, like it was a joke, like terrorizing me was entertainment. The judge's gavel slammed. Enough. In that moment, something in the room shifted. It was no longer Jason versus me. It was Jason versus the law. When the judge ordered him back into custody pending trial, I felt my lungs expand for the first time in months, but the relief didn't last, because when I walked out into the hallway, my parents were waiting. My mother's eyes were red, her hands wrung raw from twisting a handkerchief. Emily, how could you? She whispered, as if I had been the one caught laughing in a courtroom. I didn't stop walking. Emily, my father barked, his voice bouncing off the marble walls. You've humiliated this family. Do you understand that? People will never look at us the same again. I turned, finally, my voice rising sharp enough to cut through the echo. Good. Maybe now they'll see the truth. Maybe now they'll stop worshipping Jason as the golden boy and see him for what he is. My father's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. You've betrayed us. No, I said. You betrayed me the second you chose him over me. And then I walked away, their voices trailing after me like ghosts I no longer recognized. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by silence. The greenhouse ruins still haunted the yard. The scratches on the siding caught the moonlight. But for the first time, I felt something close to peace, until the phone buzzed. A blocked number. I answered before I could stop myself. Emily. Jason's voice. Low. Calm. You think this ends in court? You think bars can stop me? You're dumber than I thought. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. He was calling me from jail. Somehow, he still found a way to reach me. I recorded the call and sent it straight to Detective Harris. This will only help us, Harris said. But his tone was heavy, like he knew exactly what I did. Jason wasn't just dangerous. He was obsessed. Days turned into weeks. The trial loomed closer. And with every step, my parents grew louder in their campaign against me. They told neighbors I was unstable. They whispered to church friends that I was vindictive, cruel. My mother even showed up at my work, cornering me in the break room with trembling hands. He's your brother, she begged. You can't put him away forever. Please, Emily. Think about what this is doing to us. I pulled her hand off my arm, my voice cold. You should have thought about what this was doing to me. And I walked away, leaving her standing there. Small and shaking, but the town was watching now, and not everyone believed their lies. The video of Jason at my house had spread further than I'd expected. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with words of support. Even strangers on community forums whispered about the Carter family scandal. For once, people weren't looking at me with pity, they were looking at Jason with disgust, and at my parents with something worse, shame. One evening, as I watered the few surviving plants I'd salvaged from the wreckage, a neighbor I barely knew stopped by. "You're brave, Emily," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't stand up to family like this. But you're doing what's right." Her words settled into me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For months, I'd been drowning in guilt, painted as the villain by the very people who should have protected me. But here was someone, a near stranger, who saw the truth, and in that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just surviving Jason. I was reclaiming myself. The night before trial, I dreamed of my greenhouse. Not the ruins, but the way it once was, lush and vibrant, the air thick with the scent of life. I walked between rows of orchids, their petals glowing under soft light, and in the dream, I wasn't afraid. When I woke, I knew, whatever happened in that courtroom, Jason had already lost, because he couldn't take that from me. He couldn't take the fire he'd tried so hard to extinguish. My parents might call me cruel. Jason might call me weak, but I had survived them all, and tomorrow, I would watch them face the one thing they couldn't control, the truth. The courtroom felt colder the morning of the trial. Rows of faces watched as I took my seat at the witness table, neighbors, old classmates, people who wanted a spectacle. But all I saw were my parents in the back, stone-faced, their loyalty already spoken for, and Jason, shackled but still grinning like this was his show. The prosecutor's voice broke through the hush. "The state calls Emily Carter." I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. My throat was dry, but my voice didn't shake. The questioning began. "Miss Carter, can you describe what you saw the night your greenhouse was destroyed?" I closed my eyes for a beat, summoning the image, the crowbar swinging, glass exploding like frozen rain. "Yes. I saw my brother, Jason Carter, deliberately demolishing it. He looked at me. He knew what he was doing." The jurors shifted, scribbling notes. The prosecutor moved through the timeline, the destroyed greenhouse, the restraining order, the harassment. Each piece of evidence flashed on the screen: photographs of shattered beams, screenshots of threatening texts, the video of him raking my siding, the motel receipt, and finally, the audio recording. Jason's voice slithered through the speakers. "You think bars can stop me? You're dumber than I thought." The silence after was heavy. Then the defense attorney stood. A man with slick hair and a slicker smile. "Miss Carter," he said, drawing out the syllables like oil on water, "isn't it true that you and your brother had tension long before this incident?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that you've always seen him as favored by your parents?" "Yes." His grin widened. "So could it be, perhaps, that this is more about resentment than reality? A family rivalry blown out of proportion?" I stared at him, then at Jason. "No. This isn't about rivalry. This is about safety. He didn't just destroy glass and wood. He destroyed trust. He stalked me. He threatened me. And he laughed while doing it." The attorney tried to rattle me, but the jurors' eyes told me the truth. They weren't buying it. And then the prosecution called their surprise witness, Detective Harris. He rose, steady and grave. "In my professional experience, Jason Carter exhibited patterns consistent with escalation. Without intervention, these behaviors often progress into violence against people, not just property." The weight of his words pressed the room into silence. Even my parents looked shaken, but the defense wasn't finished. They called my mother to the stand. She walked forward slowly, clutching her purse, eyes downcast. When she swore in, her voice quivered. "Mrs. Carter," the defense attorney said gently, "can you describe your daughter Emily's relationship with her brother?" My mother's lips trembled. "She's always been difficult. Stubborn. She holds grudges." Jason's made mistakes, but he's a good boy. He loves his sister." Her words sliced me open. I had known she'd choose him. But hearing it, under oath, in front of the world, it still burned. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Carter, were you aware your son violated a restraining order?" I knew he was struggling," she stammered. "Were you aware he vandalized your daughter's property and sent threatening messages?" Silence. "Mrs. Carter?" Her voice broke. "Yes." Gasps rippled through the gallery, and just like that, her attempt to protect Jason collapsed into dust. The final blow came when the prosecution played footage from the courthouse cameras. Jason laughing during his bail hearing. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. The entire town saw it, and for the first time, Jason's grin faltered. Closing arguments felt like a funeral. The defense tried to paint Jason as a broken man who needed help, not prison. The prosecution painted him as a predator who escalated every time he was forgiven, and then it was over. The jury filed out. I sat rigid, hands clasped, every muscle tight as wire. My parents didn't look at me once. An hour later, the jury returned. The foreman's voice was steady. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Carter, guilty on all counts. Time stilled, Jason slammed his fists on the table, shouting, "This is rigged. She set me up. She's nothing without me." The bailiffs restrained him, dragging him toward the door as he screamed my name, and me. I didn't flinch. I watched him disappear down the hallway, his voice growing fainter, until all that was left was silence. But even in victory, my heart felt heavy, because when the judge set the sentencing date, my parents didn't stay. They didn't comfort me. They didn't even glance my way. They followed Jason's path, disappearing through the same doors, their loyalty trailing after the son who had destroyed everything. I sat alone in that wooden pew, the verdict echoing in my head. Guilty. The word tasted like justice, and like loss, but above all, it tasted like freedom. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air cut sharp against my skin. Reporters swarmed with cameras, neighbors whispered, strangers stared. I ignored them all, walking toward my car with my head held high. For the first time in months, my hands weren't trembling. I had faced him. I had faced them all, and I had survived. But as I turned the key in the ignition, a thought slid into me like a shadow. Blood may bind, but truth severs, and tomorrow, when the sentence fell, that severing would be complete. The courthouse was packed. Again on sentencing day, Jason shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, chains clinking at his wrists and ankles. The grin was gone now. His eyes darted, restless, searching for allies. They found my parents in the front row. My mother's hands were folded tight in prayer. My father's jaw was locked, his stare fixed on the floor. They looked like statues carved from denial. The judge entered, his robe trailing, his gavel striking the wood. The air snapped still. "Jason Carter," he began, "you stand convicted of felony destruction of property, criminal harassment, violation of a restraining order, and intimidation. You've shown no remorse. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of escalating violence. For the protection of your community, and of your sister," Jason whipped his head toward me, hatred etched in every line of his face, "I hereby sentence you to 5 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole before 3. Gasps swept the room. Jason erupted, chains rattling as he lunged forward. "Emily, you think you've won? You think this makes you safe?" His voice cracked with fury. "You'll regret this." The bailiffs wrestled him back. His words dissolved into guttural screams as they dragged him from the courtroom. I sat still, spine straight, watching until the door slammed shut behind him. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, microphones flashing, voices overlapping. "Emily, do you have anything to say? Do you feel vindicated? What will you do now?" I pushed through the crowd, saying nothing, until I reached the steps. The autumn wind whipped strands of hair across my face. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and for the first time since the night my greenhouse shattered, the air didn't feel heavy. But when I opened them, my parents were there. My mother's face was blotched from crying. My father's eyes burned with cold fire. "You've ruined him," my mother whispered, voice trembling. "Your own brother." I didn't move. "No. He ruined himself. You could have stopped this," my father snapped. "We gave you a chance to end it quietly. But you had to drag us all through the mud." I laughed, bitter, broken, but real. "You offered me hush money. Do you even hear yourselves? You were more concerned with protecting Jason's reputation than protecting me." My mother reached for me, but I stepped back. "You've chosen him," I said. "Again and again. Even now, after everything, you're still standing on his side." "We're standing with family," my father said. I met his gaze, unflinching. "So am I. I'm standing with me." Their faces fell, stunned by a truth they'd never considered. And for the first time, I didn't care if they understood. That night, I walked out to the ruins of the greenhouse. The glass had long been cleared, the beams hauled away, but the earth still bore scars of that night. I knelt down, pressed my hands into the soil, and felt the pulse of something waiting. It wasn't just destruction anymore. It was space. Space for something new. I pulled a packet of seeds from my pocket. Orchids. The same kind that once bloomed. Under the soft light of my greenhouse. As I pressed them into the soil, I whispered, "We'll grow again." The stars were bright overhead, the air crisp with promise. For the first time in months, I wasn't haunted by Jason's shadow. I was building something of my own. In the weeks that followed, neighbors I barely knew stopped by with encouragement. Friends helped me clear the last of the rubble. Strangers sent letters, sharing stories of their own families, their own betrayals, their own survival. It was as if my story had cracked open something bigger than me. I realized then, Jason had wanted to break me, to make me small. But all he'd done was make me seen, and though my parents still refused to call, their silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like freedom. One evening, as I watered the first fragile shoots breaking through the soil, I thought back to Jason's final words in the courtroom. "You'll regret this." I smiled, because regret was the one thing I didn't feel. What I Felt was strength, what I felt was peace, what I felt was mine. The greenhouse will rise again one day. Stronger. Brighter. Unshakable, and so will I.